get their response. I think this is your last educational session for welcome you.
They don't even know what they're doing. You have an hour and a half. This could suck for you. You have no idea.
We'll try not to make it suck. Try to make the most out of it. We tried to make it a little bit interesting. So, just going to introduce ourselves. You all met me yesterday at the Student Services Kahoot game. But I'm Dr. Sheila Confer. I am the director of the Academic Village. I also teach theater courses on campus. I teach some first-year seminar courses, and I teach wellness. And I work with Dr. Holler through our Center for Applied Research, and I will let him introduce himself.
As Dr. Confer said, I am Dr. Tim Holler. I am Associate Professor of Criminal Justice. Do we have any CJ majors or potential CJ majors in here? No? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll get some of you to switch. It'll happen, trust me. I am also a faculty affiliate with the Center for Applied Research. We do community-based research here in Westmoreland County and in other areas. I am the advisor to the Criminal Justice Club and to Alpha Phi Sigma, the CJ Honor Society this year. So if you want to join either of those organizations, and CJ Club is open to anyone. You do not have to be a major, you do not have to be a minor in CJ. You can just show up at our meetings and come to the events and go to trips with us, to prisons, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'll let Cassie introduce herself.
Hi, my name's Cassie. I don't work here. I'm from Blackburn Center. We are a victim services agency in Greensburg, which you will hear much more about if you haven't already. But I am the community education coordinator, so I get to partner with people like Dr. Holler and Dr. Confer on campuses to do some educational pieces. So I'm really excited to be here with you.
Awesome. So we're going to start off with an activity where we have you get out your phones, actually. And what we would like you to do is just find a picture on your phone of a person, not a pet, who you care about, somebody who means a lot to you and who you can send a quick text to. And once you find that picture, you can go ahead and just, you can show it to your person sitting next to you, be like, hey, this is my mom, she's really awesome.
If they don't text you back after you text them, you may want to reevaluate how much you care about these people.
Yeah, so just shoot this person a quick text and tell them what they mean to you, tell them why you're grateful to have them in your life. Boyfriend? Grandma? And your mom.
Is that the same person for all three? Did you just answer all three? That was you for the same?
No, I said
grandma. Oh, okay, I got you. I thought it was the same person.
So we had a boyfriend, grandma, mom, and aunt, I think somebody said.
Who else? Anybody text any of their new friends that they found here? Tell each other you care about one another? No? We're not there yet?
So how did it make you feel to send that text, or even, because I know maybe some of you didn't bother to do it, but for whatever reason, how does it make you feel to think about sending a note of gratitude to somebody? Kind of cool?
great.
That's the correct answer. Anyone feel kind of awkward doing that? Very cringy.
Why?
Okay.
Why is that cringy? Why is it hard to do that? Say that again. You do it all the time? What about the rest of you? Why is this hard to do? It is a little cringy, right? We don't typically do this. We should all do it a little bit more often, but we don't typically do something like this.
We had somebody in the last session whose person they texted got back to them and wanted to know if everything was okay.
Right, I didn't think something's wrong with you.
Wait, what's wrong? Why are you doing this? So the reason we asked you to do this is kind of twofold, right? First of all, from a wellness perspective, it's actually really good for us to express gratitude, right? It's good for our mental health, it's good for our physical health. There's a lot of science to back that up. Just the simple act of showing gratitude is good for you, right? The second reason we ask you to do that is because we want you to think about this campus community, the people in this community, in the same way you think about the people who you care about. So you've already seen the Pitt Promise several times, right? We've pulled out just a few bullet points from it to emphasize for this particular session. We think it's very important to embrace the concept of a civil community, okay? We want to avoid any disruptive and deceitful behavior toward other members of the community. And remember, your faculty and staff who are on campus are also members of the community. So not just your fellow students. Obviously, we want to support a culture of diversity, respecting the rights of everyone who differs from us, and contribute to the development of a caring community where compassion for others and freedom of thought and expression are valued. So, this whole idea of building empathy for people who we don't know, right? You don't really know each other very well yet. But we want you to grow and learn to respect everyone in the same way that you respect the people who you love and care about. So to that end, wait, I wanted you to think about something else first. I wanted you to think about that person whose picture you looked at and who you sent the text to. And I want you to think about how you would like them to be treated, right? If they were here in this community instead of you, how would you expect them to be treated by other people? Okay. And how would you feel if they were treated badly or poorly, or if they were bullied or victimized in some way? Right. How would you want a community to behave in order to keep that person that you care about safe and happy and healthy?
That's not a rhetorical question. You can answer it.
You may answer that question. What would you expect? Absolutely. So that person who you really care about, right, if they were in a community like this, how would you expect others to treat them? How would you expect others to treat them? Good, make them feel welcome.
Respect.
With respect. Good. Would you want somebody to just ignore that person if something was happening to them? No. Of course not. Right? So what I want you to think about is the fact that every single one of you, every single person in this room has somebody or several somebodies who think about them that way. Right? All of you have people who love and care about you. They may not necessarily be here, but they expect that you will be treated with respect as part of this community. And that's what we expect to happen as well. So that's why we want to talk to you a little bit about this concept of bystander behavior. So what do you think a bystander is? What do you think of when I say the word bystander? Yes, go ahead. Right, so somebody who's on the side doesn't get involved. Anything else? That was pretty thorough. Right, so somebody who stands by and watches something else happen, basically, and maybe doesn't take any action. So if we turn that kind of on its ear a little bit, what do you think we mean when we say upstander?
Someone who does take action.
Right. These are very simple questions, right? So a bystander is somebody who just kind of stands by and allows something to happen, whereas an upstander takes some kind of action. We also talk about bystanders in a different way. We sometimes use the phrase pro-social bystander. And by inserting that term pro-social, we kind of apply some action to that. So somebody who does something that's positive, that creates some kind of positive change or input. So think about situations where, and it doesn't have to be something super serious, right? What are some situations where a bystander or an upstander could take action or intervene?
Or have you found yourself in any of these situations where you had to potentially take action? Or not, for that matter? Anybody? Go ahead.
Harassment of any sort? If something, you see someone being harassed, you move in and sort of stand up for the other person.
All right, so harassment situations. What else? Go ahead.
Now, this might be a little bit of a wild shot, but if someone was getting mugged, you could also step in.
You could give them your wallet instead.
Yeah. Mugging does not happen on this campus, I will say that. Go ahead. Guys, listen up. Bullying situations. Okay. Go ahead. Peer pressure situations. Discrimination. You guys have a lot more examples in the first group, I will tell you that. Go ahead. Fighting. All right. Any kind of prejudice that's happening on campus or beyond the walls of this community. How many people pull over when they see somebody broke down on the side of the road? It can be something as simple as that. You do. One person. One person. The rest of you will not do it. You will?
Tim is a terrible example.
So if you wouldn't tend to pull over or stop if you saw somebody broken down on the side of the road, I see a lot of people shaking their head, no. Why not? Yeah. Oh, you don't think they would do it for you, so screw them, because screw you, right? That's a great attitude.
Got hit by somebody who wasn't paying attention, right? That happens to our emergency workers, what are those? Yeah, construction, there was one other one I was thinking of. Whatever, it'll come to me at some point.
So yeah, so, bystander intervention isn't necessarily always positive, and what we want to do is we want you to think about ways that you can intervene safely. We're not expecting you to ever put yourself in harm's way, right? Trying to break up a mugging, right? Could not end well for you. Actually pulling over and getting out of your car if you see somebody broke down may not be the safest thing for you to do, but there are ways that you can intervene in those situations safely. Anyone think of any ways you can do that?
How could you help?
What if nobody's on the way?
At least it'll make him feel good for a few minutes. Go ahead. Right? You don't have to get out of the car. You can say, hey, do you need me to call somebody for you without ever getting out of your vehicle so you can step on the gas if they start chasing you? Who else could you call? We're not going to run them over. That's probably not going to work out too well for anybody. Who else could you call? Well, always call Ghostbusters first, but... Play? What? Who else could you call? Remember, I'm a criminal justice professional. Who said it?
I heard it.
The police, right? Cops, the people who deal with these situations all the time, non-emergency and emergency situations. Absolutely. So there are other ways to intervene without putting yourself in danger.
So I think, a lot of times we just assume that somebody else has already done something, right? This is why sometimes the concept of bystander intervention originated from a case long back in the 60s, maybe? The Kitty Genovese case where a woman, Kitty Genovese, was stabbed to death on the street, and nobody intervened. Not only did no one intervene, nobody called the police. And I do think eventually it came out that some people did call the police. It wasn't that nobody intervened, but there was a lack of immediate intervention, and she ended up dying. And so that kind of got researchers to start studying this thing they called the bystander effect, which basically is we just assume somebody else is going to do something. And the somebody else should be us. If there's something if you see something and you can do something safely, you should. Okay. All right. So some ways that you can do that are using what we call the 5 Ds of bystander behavior, right? It could be direct. So somebody's harassing or bullying somebody, you go like, hey, cut it out, we don't do that. Right? Distract. This is my favorite. Right? Create a distraction. Right? If somebody is being targeted, right, you don't want to make yourself a target. What you want to try to do is distract the person who's doing the bullying or the harassment and kind of get that person away from there. I give an example of a time I was hanging out in a bar with my mom. I'm just going to get that out of the way. My mom's not hanging out in bars. And there was a woman sitting across from us, and there was a man that was kind of a little too close to her. He was kind of like touching her, and at first it was like, oh, they're on a date, but then it became pretty clear that that wasn't the case, and she was very uncomfortable with what was happening. She kind of caught my eye at one point, and her eyes got really big. And so I just took a chance, and I said, oh, hey, can you come over here for a second? I wanted to talk to you about that meeting that we have next week, or again, I don't remember what the distraction was that I put out there, but she was very grateful to get up and walk away, and she came and she sat with us, and she hung out with us until the guy left, and it worked out really well. So it was a distraction. It's also kind of a delaying tactic, right? Another thing you can do is delegate. Dr. Heller mentioned call the police, call somebody, tell someone, tell anybody, right? If it's not something you feel like you can deal with on your own, a lot of times these things can be addressed after the fact, right? So just talk to somebody and let them know. And the last one is document. What do I mean by document? Film it. Take a picture, right? I don't think that the cop who killed George Floyd would have gone to jail if somebody hadn't videotaped it. And how many times has that happened where something like that has been caught on film and the person ultimately ended up being held accountable? Right? So if you can document it, that's a really good way of being a bystander and kind of keeping yourself out of it a little bit.
I'd just like to add to the document action that this can also apply if you know somebody who is in an abusive situation or abusive relationship, or if you yourself find yourself in an abusive relationship. It can be really difficult to leave that relationship, and it can, even though that's maybe your first reaction to try to help somebody get out of that situation, which is understandable, it's not always possible. So it's really important if somebody who's being abused is able to document that abuse anytime it happens, writing it down or saving it in film or texting it to somebody if that's a safer option for them, can not only be really helpful down the road if there's legal action taken, like Dr. Comfort was saying about having a video of a crime happening. If there's legal action taken against somebody who's being abusive, having documentation of that abuse can be very, very beneficial legally. But it can also give somebody who's being abused a sense of empowerment and that they have some control over something that they can do, even if it's not safe or possible for them to get out of that situation at that time. So that's just another way that documentation applies in terms of being an active bystander, because sometimes you might be a bystander in your own situation and not quite know what to do. So that's another example.
And if you encounter any kind of situation while you're here that you're like, boy, I just really don't know what to do. You already have 2 really good resources in Dr. Holler and myself. Cassie's going to have some information that you can pick up after the session that has the Blackburn Center hotline on it. The hotline, she'll mention this later, is not just for crises, it's for anybody who needs help dealing with any kind of situation they don't really know how to deal with related to somebody else's safety or somebody else who's being harmed. So we're not expecting you to walk out of here knowing exactly what to do in every situation. Just want you to kind of think about being more of a pro-social bystander.
And know that we would always prefer, all of us here and all of the faculty and staff and other community resources, we always prefer that you reach out and ask questions or tell somebody if you're worried about something. We always prefer that you do that rather than wait to see if it gets worse or wait to see if it's a problem. It's always okay to talk to somebody about what your concerns might be.
We have props. Can we get our peer leaders, please? Hey, Tim.
Just 2 of you. 2. Well, I guess we can use all of you. What? What?
Push back.
Oh.
Okay. All right.
So what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about some behaviors. Right? Some inappropriate, all inappropriate, some illegal. Right? And we are going to discuss how we as a community and how society see these behaviors. And you'll notice that the first line on here, you can see it on the board up there and on the whiteboard as well. The first line here is the recognition line. Right? This is how readily we as a community, not you personally believe, because you have personal feelings about these things, but how the community may see these behaviors. Right? Our campus community, the larger community, Westmoreland County, right? Society as a whole, how do we recognize these behaviors in terms of seriousness? In how much we pay attention to them and how much we do about them. So we are going to have our peer leaders hold up some behaviors. And you all are going to decide where they go on our recognition scale. If there is a behavior that you don't know what it is, look it up. Right, look it up on Google, search it, and find out what that behavior is. And I guarantee you there will probably be at least one that you won't know what it is.
And just to provide some context, we've placed murder at the high end. Because we believe that everyone can agree that murder is a highly inappropriate behavior.
And we all recognize it.
And we all recognize that that is highly inappropriate. So
this one is not up for debate.
right. All right. Let's start with bullying.
That's the other side. Yeah, you're right. No, hold it up. Hold it. There you go.
Okay, hold it up. We pictured this like kind of like we're at a wrestling match. Like the ring girls are like walking on the side. It hasn't really worked out the way we conceptualized it.
Ring persons, yes. Bullying. Where do we put this on our recognition scale? And again, this is not how serious it is to you personally, but how the community may see something like this. Low? Low? Low?
All the way at the bottom.
Interesting.
Okay. Now, the reason we do this way is this is a continuum. So continuums are fluid and things change. So if you're sitting here, you're thinking about it, we put something else up and you're like, ooh, I think something needs to move, let us know and we can move something. Okay. Go ahead and turn your others around. I
How
got
about
it.
snooping on someone's phone?
It's like, so on the card we have looking at your partner's phone or text without their permission.
How serious in terms of recognition? Is this a big deal for the community? No?
Is it more serious than bullying?
More serious than bullying, less serious?
Okay, we'll split the difference and we'll say the same. It's not, because it was like, it's not. Okay.
And again, I'll reiterate, this is not how you personally feel about these things, because we obviously know some of you are going to be like, bullying is terrible, and we should recognize it as being higher, closer to murder, but this is as a community here.
All right, you're done with that.
How about catcalling? Low end? Slightly higher than bullying? What is catcalling? catcalling a type of harassment. What is catcalling? Flirting is questionable.
It's not flirting. It's not flirting.
Say that again.
Nice try.
I can't hear you. Okay, undesired flirting, unwanted flirting, right? Yelling things out to someone as they pass by. I used to work on a roofing crew who they were severely inappropriate, and I did partake in that behavior at one point in time in my life. But they would yell at women passing by on the street, down because they knew they couldn't come up and yell at us. We were on a roof, right? They could actually yell down at them. Right? That is catcalling. So we have said this is lower than bullying.
All right, turn that card.
How about stealthing?
Look it up.
Look it up. Tread lightly. Who wants to tell us what stealthing is? What's stealth? Yeah, listen up, listen up.
Describes when a man removes a condom during sexual intercourse. Display of
Right. Hi. Say hi. Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I think most of the time people aren't really familiar with this term, but as soon as they do find out, that's the reaction. All right. Stalking. It depends on what. It depends. Okay, wait. So somebody said in the middle. Somebody said it depends on if it's your ex or not. No, I'm just getting a feel for the room here. So I feel like we're kind of saying it's in the middle. Yeah. Okay. Depends on the person. How about race? So
Wait a second. First of all, this is being recorded. All they're going to see is this crowd clapping when we brought up the word rape. So,
I think because I put it in
I get it.
I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. So, I have a question. We use the term rape. What if I had used a different term like sexual assault? Same spot. You think in general society views rape as the same way? The legal definition of rape. Sexual assault more towards the middle, right? Because there are certain acts that people think of as maybe sexual assault that they don't think constitute rape, even though legally they may. Right? Absolutely. But again, we're talking about our society in general. I'm just trying to give you something to think about. I'm not suggesting we move it. It's all about thinking. It's college. We think. All right.
How about discrimination?
Further.
Discrimination. Head of staff. Remember this is in terms of what society thinks, not
Okay,
what
I think maybe people are misunderstanding the point of the exercise. If you personally feel very passionate about this kind of behavior being really bad, That's not necessarily how society views it, right? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about generally how does society view discrimination.
Discrimination is real. Put it low.
Interesting. All right. Now you're thinking. Okay. What's next?
It's not really mad about that.
I know. Uninvited comment. This is kind of similar to catcalling. All right.
How about pressuring someone for sex? Middle, high, low. Yep.
So this is the same as this. It's just saying. And again, I agree with where you decided to put it. Interesting. Yeah, nobody cares until you use that word. Right.
It sounds like we have more people who want to be criminal justice majors.
I'm getting a sense of a lot of criminal justice-minded people here. Yeah.
We have a minor too, by the way. It's only 15 credits. So you can take that.
Shameless plug.
Okay. Unwanted touching.
Middle. And again, there's some context that matters here as well, right? You've heard a lot recently about guys who will put their hands on the small of a woman's back as they're trying to move her, like trying to get around her. Inappropriate touching. We had a teacher, I'm not going to name names, in high school who would put his hands on the backs of the girls' shoulders while they were doing their art projects and look over top. Creepy, right? Creepy, right? So again, the context absolutely matters here as well.
And these are not really, black and white, right? Because everyone has different interpretations about these kinds of things, and that's why we do this. That's why we try to have these conversations as uncomfortable as they may be. All right, thank you, Sarah. All right, next.
How about racist jokes? Middle, high.
Let's create some context here. Today in 2021 in this room, maybe high. In 2021, when you're hanging out with all of your friends who happen to look just like you,
Maybe it's low.
maybe it's low, right? I have seen Twitter.
Nobody cares if you're famous or in a position of power. If you're a normal person like us, no one cares.
Well, how about the person you're making the joke about? I suspect they would care. So we're not talking about the law. We're not talking about being canceled. We're talking about individual people and how you treat them, right? So I'm going to go ahead. I'll put this in the middle because we can't agree. It's like bullying. Okay. I'll move it down a little bit.
How about sexist jokes? Even less, even lower than racist jokes?
I'm running out of room on the low end. All right.
How about revenge porn?
Revenge porn. Okay, so if you don't know what revenge porn is, we won't make you search for this one, although I did.
Be very careful.
So
Searching for
revenge porn is when somebody shares
Guys, listen up.
another person's explicit or intimate photos or videos. It happens a lot after people break up and their ex, in order to sort of get back at them, shares their photos or videos that were shared within the context of the relationship and were understood to be private. So revenge porn, where would we?
In terms of recognition.
Okay. Anytime there seems to be like really strong disagreement on either side, I'm just going to put it in the middle.
It's starting to be like a crisis right here.
I know, yeah. All right.
Just to add some more context to this revenge porn idea. There are state laws now, and I don't know if you all know this, there are state laws where you can be arrested and charged for putting out revenge porn. Now, there's no federal statute on that yet, but there are some states who have enacted legislation that you can be arrested for that behavior. So keep that in mind. Say that again? I believe so. That's a great question. I believe so. Yeah.
We are,
Yeah.
we need to do better.
All right. Doxing.
How about doxing? Do we know what doxing is?
Yeah, putting somebody's personal information out there, address, phone number. Okay.
By the way, there have been many instances of this recently. How many people play video games here? Lots of you, right? The video gaming community had some serious instances of doxing in the last 5-7 years, particularly women who were trying to stand up to the misogyny that is often embedded into video games. These women were getting doxed, they were getting rape threats, they were getting threats about killing their kids at their home. This is, we may not see this as serious, we put it down low in terms of recognition, but it is a very serious behavior. Right? Anybody, this is really random, anybody listen to the podcast, Two Bears, One Cave? Do you? Bert Kreischer, anybody? He was just recently talking about being doxed, specifically, and changing his number. So, yeah. Not that most of you know who that is, but that's okay.
All right.
Cheating on your partner. Lower, they're saying.
I don't have any more room blowers. Oh. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? You're right. Probably not. I just wanted to see if you did. Yeah, there are different. We hold people to different standards based on their gender. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Next one. Ignoring a visibly drunk or injured person. We think that's in the middle. Like a little doxing.
Am I like blocking this?
Alright, we just have a few more.
How about harassment? Harassment.
I'm gonna have to read this down because we've got things that long. Alright, next one. Oh, sorry. Okay.
How about spreading rumors? How about unwanted sexting?
Translation dick pics.
Oh,
Unsolicited dick pics.
you can edit that out, right?
Sorry. I personally feel very strongly about that, but I don't know how the society does in general. Alright. Last one. Controlling your partner's schedule. Middle. So we think society's pretty not cool with controlling other person's schedule.
Interesting.
All right.
This is not exactly the same setting that we had for the first group.
No.
What's up? What? Which one did we just put up? Yeah, I think we're just running out of room at this point. Everything's at the low
We
end.
kind of are. I was running out.
So you notice there are 2 lines on this board.
We're getting to our larger point now.
You notice there are 2 lines on this board. Anybody know what the top line represents? And you can tell there's an inverse relationship here. As one goes down, the other goes up, and vice versa. What do you think that top line is?
Like the top line, like the amount of time, like it's towards the left and not more often.
Absolutely, right? This is our frequency line. And this is our frequency line. The idea that the behaviors that we say are recognized as the least serious happen the most often in our society. Right? And what's the point of all this then, right? Why are we telling you this? Why are we talking about these behaviors? Right? Now we've talked about this in various methods. We've used a pyramid before. Right? But what we're trying to show you here is the idea that when these things happen, right, we can intervene in some way to hopefully stop them. Right? And stop them from growing into more serious behaviors. Now, we may not ever be able to stop, obviously, rape or murder as a crime of passion. We're never going to be able to stop that completely. But if we can adjust the way we respond to these behaviors on the end of the continuum, we can hopefully make an impact on things like rape, stealthing, murder, sexual assault, those things that would be high on that end of the continuum. Right? And that's what we're asking you to do by being pro-social bystanders here. When you see these behaviors, you recognize it, and you actually do something about them. I don't know if Dr. Concord was going to talk about this, but she talked about it in the last session. We had a very serious case here on campus, between here and Oakland. We had 2 students who were Pitt-Greensburg students at one point in time. I had one in my classroom, nicest kid I had ever met, big smile on his face all the time, always came and spoke to me after class.
He was in my class. I had him in class as well.
They both transferred to Oakland. Right? Now, there have been some instances here on campus that our students recognized that this guy and the way he acted, particularly around women, was pretty inappropriate. There were some concerns about the relationship as well. The female student in this case got a restraining order, a PFA, against that individual. He ended up breaking that restraining order, and he murdered her in Oakland. This was just a couple years back. So now he's spending the rest of his life in prison, as he should. But the reason we tell you this story is because that was here, right, on our campus. And those things, it's not frequent, that doesn't happen frequently. But there were instances where maybe we could have intervened as staff, as faculty, and especially as students, to actually do something about that and possibly prevent it from happening. We don't know, right? We can't say that, we would have prevented it, but there are steps that we could have taken as a community to potentially protect her, right? And we fell short, unfortunately. It was a terrible situation.
And we don't say this to make you feel guilty or like you have to be like on 100% of the time and like reporting everything you see, but really to just raise your awareness about some of these red flags and how, as a community, we can sometimes step in to stop some of these behaviors before they can become dangerous. And this is something that came up in the last session. Nobody brought it up in this session, but I want to mention it because I think it was important. Somebody brought up a situation that she had been in when she was 14 years old, where she was on a bus, and a guy was coming on to her, and she was trying to, rebuke him, and he eventually followed her off the bus, somehow found out her phone number, started calling her, and then mentioned nothing happened to her. She wasn't hurt physically, but she mentioned, kind of being very aware of instances where women have been killed for, rebuking a man's, how am I trying to say? Thank you. More words.
Well, even instances of catcalling have turned into violence, where
Right.
A guy catcalls a woman, she rejects him, and the next thing we know, it turns violent. So.
Right, and so I want to say this because we're not, sometimes when we do these sessions, I can tell some guys are getting a little defensive. They're like, hey, why are you attacking us? We're not, right? I think the point that I think that woman was trying to make and that I would make as a woman is we don't assume that all men are going to attack us and try to kill us. But we're not sure which ones, right? And so what I would ask, and I know it's hard to hear all of this, and as a man perhaps to be thinking, Jesus Christ, you know, we hear this all the time, right? But what we would really love to have happen is to see more. We know most guys are good guys, right? We'd love to see more of you just step up and step in and speak out. And then I'll throw it to Dr. Holler because he can talk about how you can do that.
Yeah, there is an organization that through Blackburn Center that Cassie is actually our fearless leader, but it is Fearless Advocates for Men's Engagement, and it is a group of men who come together that talk about what are traditionally seen as women's issues. Right? We often talk about rape and sexual assault as a woman's issue. Right? What can you do to protect yourself? I'm sure some of you had the talks with your parents. Somebody asked me after the last one, can I carry a taser here? I found out the answer is yes, but you can't just tase people for the hell of it. Right? You can't just, you know, you can't be in your dorm room tasing each other because somebody has a taser. I don't know if I should have told you all that, but you are allowed to have it. Right? So self-protective devices like that, like mace, are allowed. And we just went off the rails here. The only reason I say that is because men need to be, guys, listen up. Men need to be a part of this conversation because men are the perpetrators in most instances of these very serious crimes. Right? So myself, Al Teal, who I'm sure you've met, Dean Fogel, Bill Pamelo, one of our professors here on campus, are all part of Fearless Advocates for Men's Engagement. We work closely with the Blackburn Center in doing the walk a mile in their shoes, which we'll talk about eventually. Students, guys, if you want to be a part of this organization, again, we just get together once every month and a half, to have conversations about what we can do in our own community to address what have traditionally been seen as women's issues. But we know this stuff is not going to stop until men stop perpetrating against other men and against other women, right? Even if we're talking about men being sexually assaulted, most of the time it's by other men, right? So this idea that it's a women's issue just is not true, right? It's all of our concern to deal with, and we are trying to do that through FAME. So if you want to join that organization, please see me afterwards.
And this is maybe a good time for my biology lesson.
Sure.
So, as Dr. Holler mentioned, the majority of perpetrators are men. However, women can be perpetrators too, and sometimes I feel like there's a bit of a misunderstanding about the biology, how our bodies work. So just because a man has a physical response does not mean he wants to have sex. Sometimes a woman may have a physical response and that's misinterpreted as consent, which Cassie's going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. But I feel like there's a much larger misunderstanding when it comes to how men's bodies work. And so I just want to throw that out there to everyone to just keep that in mind. That just because somebody's body responds to you does not mean that they want to sleep with you. Okay? Boy, it always gets real quiet when they say it. They're kind of like, ew, why are you talking about that? Okay, we kind of already talked about this, so I'm going to go ahead and skip past and let Cassie talk to us a little bit about. Right, how many of you saw the little cards in the dining hall next to the French fries today? I'll have those. I'll give Dr. Holler some. If anybody wants one to hang on their refrigerator or something, we'll be sure to get you one. So, Cassie, go ahead.
All right. Thanks. You all did a really great job with that exercise. I was very impressed with you. So thank you for participating in that. We're going to talk a little bit about consent, which is one of those things you've probably heard about over and over and over again. The reason being is because some people still don't get it. So we want to just make sure that you have the tools and the information that you need to make sure that everybody stays safe. Before we get into this, we have already, through this exercise and just through what we've been talking about here, have talked about sexual assault and rape a little bit. If anybody feels triggered or uncomfortable and needs to leave, please feel free to do so. I mean, I hope you come back, but if you need to take a break, that's totally okay. Or if something is upsetting to you or triggering to you, please don't hesitate to stay after and talk to one of us. So that's just my little disclaimer. So when we put rape up on the continuum here and it moved up as high as murder, we had applause in the room, which is awesome. What if that card said sex without consent from both parties. Would that be as impactful? The wording's a little bit different. Any sexual activity without consent qualifies as a form of sexual assault. Consent can mean a lot of different things, but the base of what consent is stays the same, and that's what the FRIES acronym is for. Before we talk about it in terms of sexual activity, though, Dr. Confer likes to use the example of ordering a pizza. So if you and a bunch of your friends are ordering a pizza, is one person deciding on what the toppings are, or does everybody get an input? Everyone gets an input. We practice consent on a daily basis, whether you recognize it or not. So you know how to recognize consent, you know how to give consent, you know how to tell if somebody is not consenting. If 3 of you want to order a pizza with anchovies on it, which I don't know why anybody would do, and one person doesn't want anchovies, probably either that person's going to get their own pizza or you'll get half a pizza without anchovies on it. The default should not be, well, if most of us want anchovies, then we all want it, and so that's what we're going to get. So, taking that up to a little bit more serious level than pizza, it's the same with sexual activity. If not everybody who's involved in the sexual activity has consented to what's happening, then it's not okay. And it needs to stop, and you need to reevaluate, and you need to have communication about what's happening between you. So the first part of consent is that it's freely given. This is a really important thing to understand, because a lot of times I think what we see, especially in the media, cooperation is confused for consent. So if you are engaging in any type of physical or sexual activity with somebody, and you're feeling a little bit pressured to go further, pressured to have sex, pressure to do anything that you don't really feel like doing, and you say okay to do it just because you feel that pressure, that's not freely given consent. So it's important to understand that if you feel threatened in any way, that's not consent. Consent has to be freely given. Consent is also reversible, which means that you can be in the middle of sex and decide you don't want to have sex anymore, and that's okay. And your partner needs to listen to that need. That being said, if your consent was freely given to begin with, if everybody understood what was being consented to, a lot of times nobody's going to want to reverse it. But if somebody does want to take back their consent, that's okay. Everybody has the right and should be respected enough to be able to reverse or revoke consent at any time.
Kathy, can I just give biology lesson number 2?
Please do.
Yes, men can stop. That's all.
Men can stop. Thank you. Thank you. And similarly to biology lesson number 1, just because a man has an erection or just because a woman has an orgasm does not mean that consent is implied. Okay? So freely given, reversible, and then along the same lines, informed. Going back to stealthing, which we all learned about today, that's always a fun one for us to see you guys look up. Informed consent means if you give consent to have sex with a condom on, then you don't have consent to have sex without a condom on. So you need to know exactly what is being consented to and make sure that everybody is on board with what's happening. And if partway through a sexual encounter, somebody decides they don't want a condom on anymore, it needs to be communicated with the partner.
So I don't know how many people have taken a research methods class of any sort or signed one of these forms. How many people have seen an informed consent form before? What do they do? What do informed consent forms do? Go ahead.
Don't worry, he's not going over.
Say that again. Right, absolutely. We typically send out surveys to all of you before the semester starts as freshmen and first-year students. Right, and we tell you your informed consent. We do this in the social sciences, especially in criminal justice. We want our human subjects to be protected. Right? We want to make sure that they are giving their consent for whatever they're doing. We are not asking you to develop your own informed consent forms for your dorm room or your residence hall to hang up and be like, you know what, I'm going to need you to sign this consent form before you come in here and have sex or do anything with me. Right? We are not telling you to do that. You are going to know. Right? And Cass is going to talk about this. If you have a partner that you just met or someone you've been with for 10 years, you tend to know, right, when that consent is given and when that consent is not given. So it'd be great actually if y'all did have forms, but you don't have to do that. We don't have a template for that. But just know that you're going to know, and that communication, as Cass is going to talk about, is key in making sure that your partner understands what you want to do and what you're moving on to. Yeah, I think that's all I want
Yes,
to say.
thank you. Yeah, don't need to sign a form, but the idea behind what a consent form does for other circumstances is exactly what we're talking about with consent. If you are with somebody that, like Dr. Pollard just said, could be somebody you just met or somebody you've known or have been dating for a long time, you have an instinct to know whether or not that person feels comfortable with whatever it is that's going on. So this is not something that you're going to have to spend a lot of time thinking about. It's just something that we want you to be really aware of. Because understanding consent can really help prevent a lot of behaviors that lead up to sexual assault at some point. That doesn't mean that understanding consent is going to stop everything bad from ever happening. But the more you're aware of it and the more you understand how important it is, the better chance we have of having a safer campus and safer communities. After informed, we have enthusiastic. So sex should be fun. Sexual activity should be fun. If someone's not having fun, they're probably not really consenting to it. So just something to keep in mind. With your partner, whoever your partner or partners are, keeping up that communication throughout sexual activity, sexual interaction, whatever it looks like for you, can help you be aware of whether or not your partner is enjoying it, okay? So it's not a hard thing to understand, but it's something that you might not think about unless we're talking to you about it, something you might not think about in the moment. And then consent also has to be specific, which kind of ties in with, with informed consent. I'll use the example of stealthing again. If someone specifically consented to have sex with a condom, then to have sex without a condom requires consent again. So specific consent is really important. And this is, again, where communication comes in. If you're communicating with your partner or partners, if you're being aware of the other person's feelings, the other person's enjoyment, then you won't have to worry about this too much. You'll know instinctively that if you are wanting to do something different, that you need to communicate that to them in some way. So, consent is what creates sex and sexual activity. Sex without consent is rape. It's sexual assault. It's just that simple. And again, we are not asking you to have a consent form signed. You do not need to necessarily stop with any sexual activity with your partner and say, hey, I just want to make sure, do you consent to this? You can totally do that if you want to, but that's not always necessary if you're in tune, if you're paying attention to the other person, and if you're making sure that everybody involved is comfortable with what's going on. So, again, this is a really simple concept that we deal with every day. Like I said, you consent to things every single day. You see people revoke consent to things every single day. So it's not a hard concept to keep in mind. It's not something that we're not familiar with, but it's really, really important to keep it in mind in the context of any type of sexual activity or sexual relationship so that we can all help each other stay safe and to create a campus and a community where sexual assault becomes less common, which is really what we want in the long run.
One thing I want to mention here, and just going back to the idea that consent is freely given, I think Cassie may have mentioned the idea of coercion here. One thing you want to keep in mind is when there is a power dynamic at play, there is no such thing as consent in that power dynamic. Right? So if we're talking about someone who is incarcerated, an inmate who is incarcerated, and what we seemingly think consent to sexual activity with a guard, that's not consent. That's a coercive relationship. There's a power dynamic that exists that coerces that person into quote-unquote consenting that isn't actually consent at all. It's the same thing, teacher-student relationship. There's a power dynamic that exists there. Consent cannot be given in that case. right, because of that power dynamic. There's one other thing I wanted to mention. I can't remember what it was. Oh, the idea of reversible here. I don't know if a lot of you know this. Up until about 2013, you could not rape your wife if you were married. Legally, under the federal definition of rape, sexual assault, you could not rape your wife. A man could not rape his wife because she was his property. Right there, and she gave consent. Once you're married, that's apparently a certificate you're signing that says you are consenting to sexual activity when I want it, where I want it, how I want it, and that's it. Right? But until in 2013, that definition changed. So consent.
I just want to make sure we're hearing 2013.
Right.
Do you realize how recent that is?
Yeah. And even at the same point, men could not be raped under the federal definition as well. Right? That has now since changed also. But you can have sex with a person 1,000 times. And that 1,001st time, they may not want to do it. They are allowed to reverse their consent. Right? And we especially see this in relationships that are long-lasting, right? You think you've done it before, so they always consent. That's just not the case. Right? So you need to be very aware of this. And yeah, 2013, that's a little disturbing.
It's super disturbing. So just to wrap up this part, and then I'm going to give my little Blackburn Center spiel as well. We don't want this to feel restrictive in any way. This should actually increase your enjoyment of sexual activity when you and your partner want to be engaged in that sexual activity. This isn't meant to scare you away from trying to meet somebody or trying to form a relationship with somebody. It's meant to give you a little bit more freedom to do more of what feels good to you and to your partner as long as everybody's on the same page. So even though it kind of sounds like we're just preaching over and over and over again, consent, 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 it shouldn't feel like a restrictive part of sex. It should really feel like kind of a freeing part of sex because you don't have to worry about whether or not everybody is enjoying it. You don't have to worry about if somebody later is going to be upset because they did something with you that they didn't want to do. So try to think of it in that context. Also, it's something that you can talk with your peers about if there's confusion around it, or if you see somebody who is maybe a little bit too pushy, or whatever it might be. It's really important to have these open conversations. And for a lot of people coming in, especially as you're coming in as freshmen, you maybe haven't had these really open and honest conversations with your peers, and probably not with the adults in your life either. You're allowed to do that. We'd rather you talk about it. We'd rather you ask questions. And leading in then to Blackburn Center. So as I mentioned when I introduced myself, Blackburn Center is a victim services agency. So we provide services for victims of violence in Westmoreland County. Most of the clients we see are victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. However, we have services available for anybody who's been touched by violence, whether it's yourself or if it's somebody in your family or a close friend and you need support to help deal with your response to that violence. We have services for anybody who needs them. What I want all of you to really remember about Blackburn Center is that we have a 24/7 hotline. It's not a crisis line, although you can call if you're in crisis, and we hope that you will. But you don't have to be in crisis to call us. If you are confused about something in your relationship or something that you see one of your friends going through, or if you have a question about consent, or you hear a word like stealthing and you have no idea what it is and you want to ask somebody safe, you can call the hotline. It's confidential. Unless you tell us something about child abuse, then we have to report it. But in general, it's a confidential hotline. You can remain anonymous. You don't have to tell us who you are. All of our services are free of charge. And like Dr. Heller said earlier, we've been working with UPG for years and partnering with them to make sure that students have the resources available that you need. So we are always here for you. You are very fortunate to have a really caring and understanding staff and faculty here who not only are going to be here to support you, but they're going to reach out for the resources that you might need if it's not something that they can help you with here. So please, just remember that no matter what, you have support, you have someone who's going to listen, and you don't have to be in a major crisis to reach out for that support. We'd rather talk to you before those crises occur. Any questions about consent or about Blackburn Center? Or I wrap up.
I don't know.
Thank you.
So we are going to wrap up here in just a few minutes. Dr. Haller, Cassie, and myself will all stick around if anybody wants to talk to us privately. I think Cassie has some cards and things, if you want a card from Blackburn Center. I just wanted to throw out a few more groups on campus that if these kinds of issues interest you, if you want to learn more or do some more work around this kind of stuff, Dr. Holler advises the Criminal Justice Club, and they do a lot of really interesting activities, not just about sexual and domestic assault, but all kinds of good stuff. And there's also a women's issues group called La Femme, which is open to everyone, and also our Gender and Sexuality Alliance, GSA, the La Femme and the Criminal Justice Club are going to be collaborating next month on a human trafficking event called the Red Sand Project, so look out for that. And the GSA is going to be sponsoring a sex-positive sex ed event in October, so look out for that. And we hope to see you guys. And we hope that you'll have these conversations, because I know it's awkward. But sex is like kind of the most intimate thing you can do with another person. You should be able to talk about it.
All right, last thing here, and I should have asked this earlier, but I just wanted to point out the reason. Some of you may be sitting here, like, why did we have to go through another session on consent? You probably heard this, and somebody said this in our last session. We've been getting this stuff since we were in middle school, right? Hearing about consent, sexual assault, high school, things like that.
Bullying.
You hear it on the news, you hear it from celebrities, you hear it all over the place. But there's a reason we're still doing this. And that's because it's still happening on a regular basis. It's happening on college campuses. It's happening with groups, particularly 18 to 25 years old, whether they're on college campuses or not. So when that day comes that we don't have to talk about this, that will be a wonderful day, but it probably won't be in our lifetimes. I hope it is. And I think just based on the way you all participated in this, we clearly have a great group of first-year students here. And I can also tell you, you can take this to the other group, that this group was a little bit better than the first group. So if you know people who are in that group, just let them know. And we recorded this. So oh yeah, is that true?
That's right, you were the better one.
That's right. So
Good job, guys.
I think it has something to do with lunch. I don't know.
Probably. It was the consent fries at lunch. Thank you all again.
Thank you, guys.
Have fun if you're doing any of the events tonight.